Georgia tight end Brock Bowers has yet to play a snap in the NFL, but he's already one of the most valuable dynasty assets in the league. How many tight ends would you take over him going forward? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. Follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. Check out her work at Behind the Steel Curtain, Pro Football Focus in Yahoo. And it's a Wednesday episode, so that means the great Matt Williamson is here. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. And we are answering your mailbag questions. And our first one comes from Scott. He wants to know, how many tight ends in my dynasty league, or in your dynasty league, should you take over Brock Bowers right now? Matt, you have the floor. Why don't you go first?
Ooh, it's a tough one. I mean, because I love the prospect. I think he's so I can't help myself. I have to tell a little story. So this also shows my age. But back in the day, when I worked for ESPN, I was there for 10 years for ESPN.com. I used to be one of the voters at the Fantasy Summit. And there was 11 of us that all got a vote, and that ended up being the rankings for, ESPN.com fantasy. And it was Eric Ebron's rookie year. And I've never seen a fight that big. It was, this guy's super talented. He's a transcendent tight end. And then the other half of the room screaming, rookie tight ends don't do anything. We can't have him high. And in the end, I think we kind of settled on him down the list as opposed to up. But I'm really open to the idea that that's a thought process of the past, that I think young tight ends are now better equipped to come in and produce for fantasy. They're more receivers than blockers. I mean, so I think that he will be an asset. We saw Laporta, we saw Kincaid, and I definitely would take Laporta over him. I think he's clearly tight end one. I would take Andrews and Hawkinson still over him. Where it gets tough for me is Kincaid, McBride, Bowers. And I think I am leaning towards the veterans. It's not like they're old, but I think I would take Kincaid and McBride over Bowers, but he's right in that tier with those two for me.
Okay, what about you?
I think that's a very fair tier. And I do kind of struggle with that same tier. So most recent Dynasty ADP actually has Trey McBride as tight end 2, which is far too rich for my taste. Love Trey McBride, had a great season, but even at the age of 24, all the upside in the world ahead of him, I have trouble ranking him as the tight end 2. I think tight end 5, tight end 6 is kind of a pretty sweet spot there. It is hard to, I think, invest in these tight ends when, you obviously don't know how they'll make that transition. I do think you're right, though, that this year especially proved that tight ends, especially ones that are drafted to be more receiving tight ends, that they can make that transition to the field. And I mean, Brock Bowers just innately kind of fits that mold of a tight end that I do think is going to be drafted as more of a giant receiver than he is a true inline tight end. He's 6'4", 240 pounds, pretty small for a tight end. Over the past 3 seasons, ranked 98th percentile or better in PFF receiving grade, yards per route run, yards after the catch per reception. His strengths lie in the receiving game, and I don't see him having the size that a team is going to pigeonhole him into a blocking role that, kind of, I think slows the trajectory of some of that development for a tight end. So I think he can produce right away. I think tight end 5, tight end 6 feels about right.
This is why I love Dynasty football. It's because there's so many different opinions and ways that people value these players. because I would take Brock Bowers over all of those guys. Here's the reasoning for me.
Is he the overall tight end one for you?
Tight end one.
Yes.
Wow.
Before we have a landing spot.
Yeah. Well, that's actually going to be part of my reasoning why I think the landing spot's going to be really nice, because I think he's going to end up being a top 10-ish pick. And you look at the potential teams that he could land on, like the Chargers at 5 is like a dream scenario with Justin Herbert and Harbaugh there. I guess I have a hard time separating these guys as prospects because I love Sam Laporta pre-draft, love Dalton Kincaid. I mean, Matt, please feel free to disagree, but I feel like Bowers is at least a tier above those guys. And I know that Laporta and Kincaid landed in good situations, but just the talent alone makes me want to take Bowers, and I'll worry about the situation later.
I'm with you. In terms of an NFL receiving prospect, yes, I have him ahead of Kincaid, ahead of Laporta. I don't know if you could get a better situation than Laporta's, though.
No.
I mean, that's just jumps off the page to me. And I think Kincaid's is only improving. I mean, is Diggs a declining player? I don't think Davis is going to be back. They don't have a ton of free agency money and cap space to go get other things. I mean, they could make some moves, but I think Kincaid's target share only goes up. I'm with you. I love the young prospect. I love his ability. And maybe I'm a little low. I mean, I don't hesitate to jump on rookies. Like if we were talking about Harrison Jr., I would have him unbelievably high. I would have him over Devontae Smith and guys like that. But I just like this group of tight ends. Andrews and Hawk are the guys I'm a little concerned about, though, because of they declining assets, where everyone else, I think, is getting better and better that we've mentioned. Well,
and the Hawkinson one is so hard because he was so productive this year, but now he's coming off a major knee injury. We have no idea who the quarterback is going to be there. I guess the reason for me that like Bowers is a little bit different than like Kyle Pitts, Pitts was the 4th pick in that draft. I just like the ability for Bowers to make plays after the catch. And I just have a feeling whatever team drafts him is just going to pepper him with targets in the short, within like 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, because he is so good after the catch. We even saw Georgia give him the ball like on end arounds because he's that good of an athlete with the ball in his hands. It's just, I just get this feeling that wherever he goes, he could easily get 100 targets as a rookie. And on 100 targets, he might have 75 catches and might average 10 yards, per reception. So I'm all in on Brock Bowers. I'm willing to be wrong here, but I think the talent is so undeniably good.
So undeniably good. And I will say, if he lands with the Chargers, I mean, it's done. It's done. He's probably tight end 3 at that point because of the opportunity, obviously not just from a talent perspective, but you look at the Chargers situation, you look at, the opportunity there with an aging Keenan Allen, who he's approaching the end of his deal. Mike Williams, also coming off an injury, approaching the end of his deal. Like they have a lot of decisions to make, and this offense could look very, very different in 2 years than it does right now. You obviously have the departure of Austin Eckler, who's been a huge factor in the receiving game. They have room for a guy like Brock Bowers, and my God, if he lands there.
Joyce. Matt, any final thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, you mentioned Pitts, and I think he's interesting because people look at Pitts like, wow, what a bust. But he had over 1,000 yards his rookie season, too. I mean, didn't find the end zone much, obviously, and he's had a strange career.
To be
but
fair,
I also like go ahead.
The passing game in general in Atlanta didn't find the end zone often. So
true.
Yeah.
I like your point about Bowers near the line of scrimmage, though. I think he's a much different prospect than Pitts because I think he's a quick separator. I mean, Pitts is more of a downfield run away from you guy. Both are good after the catch, but in much different ways, where I could see Bowers' targets being high near the line of scrimmage, where Pitts isn't going to explode out of his breaks, get instant separation, get him the ball like Bowers will.
Yeah, he's kind of like the supercharged version of Trey McBride, who right now in Dynasty League football is being drafted as tight end too. Now that's a good situation with Kyler and the lack of receiving options there. But Brock Bowers, one of the more interesting Dynasty assets right now. Let's move on to quarterbacks because there's some debate on which second-year quarterback you should be trading for this offseason. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by DoorDash. Did the game go to timeout? Time to order in with DoorDash. Is it halftime? That is ordering in time. 2-minute warning. You got it. That is your cue to order in. Whenever the game clock stops, it's time to order with DoorDash. Order pizza, wings, burgers, sodas, or even just buns on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Get prepared before game day. Stock up on your favorite appetizers and order all of the tailgate gear on DoorDash, and then get ready to watch your team win. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code LOCK23, subject to change, terms apply. Again, that is 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code LOCK23, subject to change, terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. I absolutely love Prize Picks. It's so much fun. Prize Picks is the number one fantasy sports app in America with over 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of having to play against a ton of pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. The big game is right around the corner on Sunday. Prize Picks is the best way to turn every game-changing moment into 100 times your money. With as little as 4 correct picks, you can turn $10 into $10,000, such as if Patrick Mahomes throws for more than 1 yard in the big game, you win on Prize Picks. They're basically giving you away a free square. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. And don't forget, if Patrick Mahomes throws for more than 1 yard in the big game, you win on Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today podcast on Amazon Fire TV. All right, we are back here with Matt Williamson answering your mailbag questions. Our next question, Caitlin, let's start with you. Who would you rather trade for this offseason, Will Levis or Bryce Young?
All right, I might be a little biased here because I've been a Will Levis believer for a long time and a believer in his fantasy upside. So you look at the situation, and Marcus, we talked a little bit about Bryce Young last week and our sort of question marks about how this team is going to end up rebuilding around him, and will that affect his long-term dynasty value? Obviously, they traded the farm away to go and get Bryce Young, so that leaves them with limited draft capital. There are some names in free agency that they can opt to explore, but I do think that the road to rebuilding around Will Levis is a much easier one to stomach, I think, than the road to rebuilding for a guy like Bryce Young. I think the upsides here a little bit bigger for a guy like Will Levis. Say a Mike Evans lands in Tennessee in free agency. My God, you pair that rocket of an arm with a capable contested catch aficionado that can take the top off the defense. Like suddenly you're looking at a guy that I think I've used the term Josh Allen light. He's got a big build. I think you could utilize him as a runner around the goal line. He's got that tough mentality. I look at Bryce Young as a great passer, but I think he's going to need a better supporting cast if they want to unlock that version of the best Bryce Young.
Matt?
I'm not big on either, and here's why, but I will pick Levis when it's all said and done. I don't think either coaching hire made me do jumping jacks, but I prefer the Panthers version of, trying to rebuild this thing with a new coach. But I do think young coach, rookie coach, young quarterback, Texans aside last year, is pretty much a swimming upstream situation in the NFL, and rarely does it go well. I like Levis better because they at least have the first round pick that almost will assuredly go on offense. And I do think they have more avenues to improve their team. But the more and more I do this for a living, the less I care about the human beings, the Young, Levis, whomever, the more I care about where their landing spot is. I mean, it takes a village to raise a quarterback. And I think both these villages are trying to put out forest fires as we speak right now. I mean, they're far from cushy landing spots, and maybe two of the worst rosters in the league, and even ownership I have worries from both these squads. So I'm not super excited about either, but Levis by a hair.
I think I would lean Levis for a couple different reasons. I just think their path to becoming a better team and having a better roster is easier. You mentioned the first round pick. Like I just been penciling in Joe Alt, the offensive tackle from Notre Dame, at that spot. I also want to mention Bill Callahan. They signed him as the offensive line coach, one of the most respected offensive line coaches in the NFL. You look at like Cleveland last year, all the injuries that they had in the offensive line, and they were still able to have a functional offense. I'm not saying he's going to be able to do that in year one, but I do trust that he's eventually going to get those guys to play better. Listen, I know DeAndre Hopkins is getting older. He's still better than anything Carolina has at receiver. I like Okonkwo, still probably better than anything else Carolina has at tight end. And I also love that Will Levis can run the ball a little bit. And that's just, it's just such a cheat code to give you some rushing production. Even if it's 25 yards a game, it gives you a nice little floor. I think I'm not actively going out and buying Will Levis, but I think of those two, that's who I prefer.
The thing about buying Will Levis, though, is that you don't have to invest much. I think it's really interesting. Obviously, all three of us just answered Will Levis here. Will Levis actually being drafted on average behind Bryce Young, 2 spots behind Bryce Young, quarterback 22. I think that is a very fair spot for a 24-year-old quarterback with, I do think whether it comes in free agency, obviously we expect them to utilize that first round pick on offense. And I could definitely see them investing in the offensive line. But if they don't invest in the offensive line, there are a lot of top end receiving weapons that they could go out there and get and funnel targets too from their young quarterback. I just think the upside there for Will Levis is greater from a fantasy perspective because of that ability to run. But also, man, I love that opportunity there for Will Levis and for them to rebuild that offense just a bit quicker. But I mean, the rocket of an arm, guys, the rocket of an arm. Get the man some weapons.
He doesn't skip out on bicep day. We know that.
No.
Marcus,
Mayo and biceps.
I wanted to reiterate one thing you said, though, Marcus, too. I might be more excited for Levis with Daddy Callahan showing up than Sonny Boy Callahan showing up, to be honest with you. And the other thing I just wanted to throw out there, not that Carolina is by any means a patient organization, but if both these guys have middling second seasons, I would guess Young has a better chance to be the 2025 starter than Levis does.
Yeah, I would agree. One last question for you, Matt. We were looking at the ADP again. Will Levis QB 22, Bryce Young QB 20. Is now the time to trade for either of those guys, or do you wait until after free agency, after the draft, once we get this influx of talent and it's Caleb Williams and Drake May and Jaden Daniels kind of pushing these guys down? Is that the time to go after one of them?
It's a great question. I don't feel strongly either way, but I would lean towards now because I bet Carolina is aggressive somehow. Maybe T. Higgins ends up there or something. You just know that organization is not going to sit on their hands. Maybe they'll trade their future first next year or something crazy for a receiver. I mean, they just live in the moment. I bet they put something around Young that makes people excited about him. I'm not sure if Tennessee will be the same or not, but I do think Carolina will be aggressive before the draft.
All right, let's move on to which player in your dynasty leagues is the scariest right now. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today I want to tell you how I feel about something. You might even be thinking the same thing this week. I hate Super Bowl parties. I just want to watch the game, but everybody at the party, there's so many people talking and eating. It's hard to actually like focus on the game. So I might this year just skip the Super Bowl party and stay home, watch it by myself because it should be an awesome game. There you go. I feel better now that I got that off my chest. I'm probably the only person in America who does not like Super Bowl parties. Therapy can help you out. You can get some stuff off your chest, like whether or not you like Super Bowl parties or not. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, and it's important to get things off of your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Our final question here comes from Jared. He wants to know, what is the one player in your Dynasty league that keeps you up at night because maybe they're really risky. Maybe you're worried that you're wrong on them. Matt, why don't you go first?
I'm going to go Travis Etienne. Tank Bigsby was a massive flop, and I missed on him bad. I went after him strong in rookie drafts. Basically, just for the logic that if Jacksonville's taken him in the third round, they must not think Etienne's a workhorse type player, a short yardage guy, a grinder, and I don't either. And Etienne flashes, but I don't trust his consistency. And the thing that I dislike most about him is a kind of a common misconception. I don't think he's a natural receiver at all. I don't think he's a route runner. I mean, usually guys his size with his explosiveness are better in the passing game. I know he's put up some numbers there, but he's not much of a route runner. He doesn't catch the ball real cleanly. So he's kind of missing that aspect of the portfolio.
Okay. You're on mute.
I definitely, I understand the hesitancy, and I actually have similar hesitancy with Etienne, but I will say there's another running back in a similar tier that has me just a bit more nervous, and it's Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks, who as a player, absolutely love. His speed is unlike anything. If he gets to the second level, he's gone, and it's going to be a touchdown. Like there's no question about the kind of skill that he brings to the team, but I'm still tepid at best when we look at Zach Charbonnet, because I also really like Zach Charbonnet. And if he landed anywhere else besides the Seahawks, where he is competing for snaps with another very talented running back, I think Zach Charbonnet could have been a fantasy relevant running back out of the gate in a different situation. I think both of these running backs are very different. They offer very different types of skill sets. With Walker, you have that breakaway speed. I think Zach Charbonnet offers you more in between the tackles, a little tougher after contact, like very different types of running styles. And I'm curious to see, like, what is this new coaching regime going to do with both of these running backs? Their draft capital, not too far off. As we know, both second round picks. I think they were drafted just 10 picks apart here in the second round, back-to-back year. Like, I don't know what to do with Kenneth Walker. And I think it's really hard to invest in Kenneth Walker as a top tier running back when I think there's another really, really talented guy sitting alongside him in the meeting room.
Matt, your thoughts on Walker?
It's a good one. I mean, like, I wish Walker was on my favorite team. I think he has, I mean, he's so hard to get off his pins. He has great contact balance. He has the home run abilities, as you mentioned, but he also isn't much of a receiver. And kind of the ATN conversation, man, you need that in your profile to really be worth it. And again, as Kate mentioned, what's his coaching staff think of him? They may prefer Charbonnet. Maybe they want a 50-50 split. So who knows exactly what their thoughts are here.
Matt, of those two running backs, Etienne and Walker, which one would you prefer in Dynasty?
In real world, I'd much rather have Walker. I think I slightly prefer him in Dynasty too.
Kate?
I'd probably take Etienne. I think, from a draft capital perspective, from a competition perspective, like we might not, I think on a real life level, I had to pick a guy to play for my favorite team, it'd be Walker, hands down. But I do think from a fantasy perspective and from an opportunity perspective, ETN has a lot less to compete with. And as a former first round pick, I do think that they're going to continue to funnel him with opportunities until they don't. And I'll take that all day.
I'll be really quick on the guy that for me that scares me. And it's Joe Burrow. And I might be biased because I think Burrow might be my favorite quarterback in the NFL to watch right now. But the injuries are really starting to pile up. We saw the rushing production go down this year because of the calf injury. He could lose T. Higgins in free agency. He's QB 6 right now in Dynasty, and the guys right behind him all have just a much higher ceiling. Justin Herbert, Anthony Richardson, Justin Fields. I just don't know what to do with Joe Burrow because, man, when he's on and he's right, he plays the quarterback position maybe better than anybody else outside of Patrick Mahomes. But in terms of a dynasty asset, QB 6 feels rich. Matt, what do you think?
That's a great one. And just take it a step further. You look at the Bengals, what's around him right now. Jonah Williams, the right tackle, I think is highly, highly unlikely to be back. And maybe that's a first round pick, but it's going to be something different. They don't have a tight end under contract. I mean, that's concerning. I think Mixon's about shot, but I bet he's gone. You mentioned Higgins. That's the obvious one. If they do bring him back, I'm sure Boyd won't be back, who's also a free agent. So the chance of his supporting cast being better than it's been is pretty slim.
Also lost his offensive coordinator.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
And he's been so reliant on being efficient and having the volume, right? Because you're not getting the rushing upside. I don't know. He's somebody that obviously I want on my real life team, but as a dynasty quarterback, there's probably 7 or 8 guys that I might prefer at least going into the 2024 offseason. That is it for today's show.
Big injuries too with that guy. Big injuries. That's
not little. The knee injury, the calf injury this year. Now he's coming off the hand injury. Like,
how many training camps has he had? Like one.
I don't think he's played
the appendectomy. The one, yeah, right.
I don't think he's played in a preseason game yet. We talked about, we're going to talk about Tua on tomorrow's show, but Tua's injury history is scary for a different reason because concussions are, it's just a bigger injury when it comes to your NFL availability. But he's had far fewer injuries than Joe Burrow, and he's got a better supporting cast, a better play caller, and yet the difference in them in terms of dynasty value is pretty significant. It's just something to monitor over the next few months. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Go check him out on the other podcasts he does here for the Locked On Podcast Network. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. Read her work at Behind the Steel Curtain and Pro Football Focus. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow when we are recapping the Miami Dolphins from the 2023 season.